They told her she'd never handle the recoil of a sniper rifle. Her hands were too delicate, her frame too fragile for precision shooting. But when enemy forces surrounded her unit and conventional tactics failed, this dismissed young woman would take a single shot that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about what makes a deadly marksman. The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Meridian as 22-year-old Emma Kozlov stood at the edge of the firing range, watching. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The male recruits take their turns with the Barrett M82 sniper rifle. The weapon's thunderous crack echoed across the Serbian training facility, followed inevitably by the same conversation she'd heard dozens of times. "Good grouping, Petrov," Sergeant Major Dmitri Volkov called out, examining the target through his binoculars. "That's how you handle a real weapon." Emma shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her delicate fingers unconsciously curling and uncurling. At 5 feet 4 inches with a slender build that made her look more like a university literature student than a military recruit, she stood out among the broad-shouldered men who dominated the advanced marksmanship program. Her auburn hair was pulled back in regulation style, but wisps escaped to frame a face that carried the classical features of her Eastern European heritage. "Kozlov." Volkov's voice cut through her thoughts. "You're up." Emma approached the firing line, aware of the whispers that always followed her movements. The Barrett M82 lay on its bipod, looking more like a piece of artillery than a precision rifle. At 30 pounds and firing .50 caliber rounds, it was designed for soldiers with the physical presence to match its power. "You sure about this, Kozlov?" asked Private Marko Jovanovi, not unkindly. "This isn't like the training rifles. The recoil on this thing can dislocate shoulders." Emma had heard variations of this concern since arriving at Camp Meridian 3 months ago. Her marksmanship scores with standard rifles were exceptional. She consistently outshot most of her male counterparts. But when it came to the heavy-caliber precision weapons that defined elite snipers, the instructors had different standards. "I can handle it," Emma replied quietly, settling into position behind the rifle. Volkov stood behind her, his arms crossed. "Kozlov, I've seen men twice your size get knocked flat by that rifle. The .50 cal isn't forgiving to people who can't absorb the impact." "With respect, Sergeant Major, I'd like to try." A murmur ran through the gathered recruits. Emma's determination was well known throughout the unit, but so was the instructor's skepticism about her physical capabilities. She'd been relegated to communications and reconnaissance training, deemed unsuitable for the direct combat roles that heavy weapons required. "Very well," Volkov said, stepping back. "But when you get knocked on your ass, remember that I warned you." Emma pressed the stock firmly against her shoulder and adjusted her grip. She'd studied the Barrett's mechanics obsessively, reading technical manuals and watching training videos during her off-duty hours. She understood the theory of managing recoil, the importance of body position, follow-through, and not fighting the weapon's natural movement. The target sat 800 meters downrange, a standard silhouette that looked impossibly small through the scope. Emma controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and began the trigger squeeze she'd practiced thousands of times with smaller rifles. The rifle roared like thunder, and Emma felt the massive recoil slam into her shoulder. But instead of being thrown backward, she rode the impact, her body absorbing the energy while maintaining her position. The follow-through was clean, her scope picture returning quickly to target. "Miss," Volkov announced after checking through his spotting scope. 2 inches high, 1 inch left. "Not bad for a first shot, but that's exactly why we need soldiers who can handle multiple engagements." Emma said nothing, but inside she felt a familiar frustration building. The shot had been close, within acceptable margins for a first attempt. With an unfamiliar weapon, But close wasn't good enough when the underlying assumption was that she couldn't handle the rifle at all. "Jovanovi, show her how it's done," Volkov ordered. As Marko took position behind the rifle, Emma stepped back and watched him fire 3 rapid shots, each one finding the target center mass. The other recruits nodded approvingly while Emma made mental notes about his technique, his breathing pattern, his scope adjustments. "That's what precision shooting looks like," Volkov announced. "Power, control, and the physical presence too. Maintain accuracy under pressure." Emma walked away from the firing line, officially dismissed from another advanced training session. But as she headed toward the communications bunker where she was assigned, her mind was already working on the problems she'd observed. Marko was skilled, but his technique relied heavily on brute force rather than finesse. That night, as the base settled into its evening routine, Emma would begin the secret training regimen that no one knew about. Because being deemed unsuitable for heavy weapons didn't mean accepting that judgment. It meant finding another way to prove them wrong. The old ammunition storage bunker sat forgotten at the eastern edge of Camp Meridian, abandoned since the facility's expansion 5 years earlier. Most personnel avoided the area entirely. It was too far from the main base for casual visits, and too close to the restricted training zones for unauthorized access, which made it perfect for Emma's purposes. At 03:00 hours, when the base hummed with only essential night operations, Emma made her way through the shadows toward her secret training ground. In her pack, she carried equipment she'd been quietly acquiring for months: ballistic charts, wind meters, range cards, and most importantly, detailed technical manuals for every sniper system used by NATO forces. The bunker's interior was dark and musty, but Emma had transformed one corner into a makeshift classroom. Pinned to the concrete walls were topographical maps marked with elevation changes, wind patterns, and calculated trajectories. A small desk held notebooks filled with mathematical formulas for bullet drop compensation and environmental factors. Emma had discovered early in her military service that she possessed an unusual gift for mathematical calculation. While other recruits struggled with basic ballistics, she intuitively understood the complex physics of long-range shooting. Bullet velocity, gravitational drop, atmospheric pressure, temperature effects, they all formed patterns in her mind, like pieces of a vast puzzle. But natural aptitude meant nothing if she couldn't access the training to develop it. Tonight, like every night for the past 2 months, Emma worked through advanced shooting problems that weren't covered in her communications courses. She calculated engagement scenarios that pushed beyond standard military doctrine, studying techniques used by elite units that she wasn't considered qualified to join. The irony wasn't lost on her. During daylight hours, she was deemed too fragile for precision shooting. But in darkness, working alone with only her intelligence and determination, she was developing theoretical knowledge that surpassed most of the instructors. Her secret extended beyond academic study. 3 times a week, Emma practiced dry-fire exercises with a training rifle she'd modified to match the weight and balance of the Barrett M82. In the confined space of the bunker, she worked on trigger control, breathing techniques, and most critically, body mechanics for managing heavy recoil. The key insight had come from watching slow-motion footage of champion shooters. The most successful marksmen didn't fight recoil, they channeled it. Emma was developing techniques that used her smaller size as an advantage rather than a limitation. Lower center of gravity, more precise muscle control, better natural flexibility for awkward shooting positions. But her theoretical knowledge remained just that, theoretical. Every request for additional range time was politely denied. Every suggestion about alternative techniques was dismissed with patronizing smiles. The instructors had made their assessment. Emma Kozlov was communications material, not a combat shooter. The breaking point came during a unit meeting where Sergeant Major Volkov discussed upcoming advanced training assignments. "The Sniper Specialist course starts next month," he announced to the assembled recruits. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm recommending Jovanovic, Petrov, and Stankovic. These men have demonstrated the physical and mental capabilities required for precision shooting. Emma raised her hand. Sergeant Major, I'd like to request consideration for the program. The room fell silent. Volkov's expression shifted from professional to something approaching pity. Kozlov, we've been through this. The sniper program isn't about good intentions. It's about proven capability with heavy weapon systems. My marksmanship scores are in the top 10% of the unit, Emma replied, her voice steady despite the growing tension. With training rifles, Volkov emphasized. Combat sniping requires sustained accuracy with .50 caliber systems under extreme stress. You've had your chance with the Barrett. The results speak for themselves. One attempt with an unfamiliar weapon hardly represents enough. Volkov's voice cut across her protest. This discussion is over. You have valuable skills in communications. Focus on developing those instead of chasing assignments you're not suited for. As the meeting dispersed, Emma overheard the conversation that would fuel her determination for weeks to come. I don't understand why she keeps pushing, Jovanovic said to Petrov as they walked past her. She's obviously talented with the standard gear. Why embarrass herself trying to handle weapons designed for larger soldiers? Pride, Petrov replied. She can't accept that some jobs require physical characteristics she doesn't have. It's actually kind of sad. Emma sat in the empty meeting room long after the others left, staring at the assignment board where the sniper course participants were listed. 3 names, all male, all selected based on assumptions about what precision shooting required. That night, her training in the abandoned bunker took on new intensity. Emma worked through engagement scenarios that pushed the boundaries of conventional doctrine. She studied unconventional shooting positions, calculated solutions for extreme-range targets, and developed techniques that played to her strengths, rather than trying to compensate for perceived weaknesses. Because Emma had realized something that her instructors hadn't. The future of precision shooting wasn't about overpowering recoil. It was about precision, intelligence, and the ability to make impossible shots when conventional tactics failed. She just needed an opportunity to prove it. And as tensions escalated in the surrounding region, with intelligence reports suggesting increased enemy activity near the border, Emma sensed that opportunity might come sooner than anyone expected. In the darkness of the bunker, surrounded by her calculations and theories, Emma continued her secret preparation. When the moment came, she would be ready to show them that handling recoil wasn't about size or strength. It was about being smart enough to turn physics into an advantage. The morning briefing 3 weeks later carried an undercurrent of tension that Emma hadn't felt since arriving at Camp Meridian. Intelligence reports had been painting an increasingly troubling picture of the border region, and today's session felt different from the routine operational updates they'd grown accustomed to. Major Elena Petrovich stood at the front of the briefing room, her weathered face serious as she addressed the assembled unit. Maps covered the wall behind her, marked with red zones that seemed to grow larger each day. Emma took her usual position near the back, notebook ready, though she suspected today's information would extend far beyond her communications responsibilities. Gentlemen, Petrovich began, then glanced toward Emma. And lady, the situation in Sector Delta has escalated beyond our initial projections. What began as isolated incidents has developed into coordinated enemy movement. The Major activated a digital display showing satellite imagery of mountainous terrain. Emma recognized the landscape immediately. She'd studied these same topographical features during her private training sessions, calculating theoretical engagement distances and wind patterns for precisely this type of terrain. Enemy forces have established 3 forward observation posts along the ridgeline. Petrovich continued, using a laser pointer to indicate positions on the map. These positions give them oversight of our primary supply route and advance warning of any conventional approach. Staff Sergeant Andreas Mueller, the unit's senior marksman, leaned forward in his chair. "Ma'am, what's the engagement distance from our nearest feasible approach point?" 1,200 to 1,400 meters, Petrovich replied. "Beyond the effective range of standard infantry weapons, and the terrain makes vehicle-mounted systems impractical." Emma felt her pulse quicken. These were exactly the types of extreme-range scenarios she'd been studying in secret. The mathematics were complex but manageable. Environmental factors, elevation differences, and atmospheric conditions that would challenge even experienced snipers. "The good news," Petrovich continued, "is that battalion is assigning a specialized sniper team to eliminate these positions. The team should arrive within 72 hours to conduct the operation." Sergeant Major Volkov nodded approvingly. "What's our unit's role in supporting the operation?" "Standard support functions. Communications, logistics, perimeter security. The specialists will handle the technical aspects of the engagement." As the briefing continued with discussions of supply coordination and communication protocols, Emma found herself mentally working through the targeting solutions. Wind patterns in mountainous terrain, temperature variations between valley floors and ridgelines, the ballistic coefficients required for sustained accuracy at extreme range. After the briefing dispersed, Emma approached the display for a closer look at the satellite imagery. The enemy positions were well chosen, elevated, terrain with excellent visibility and natural cover that would make conventional assault extremely costly. Fascinating stuff, isn't it? Emma turned to find Jovanovic standing behind her, his expression curious rather than mocking. "The tactical situation?" she asked. "The challenge," he clarified. "Those positions are perfectly placed to disrupt everything we're trying to accomplish in this sector. Whoever planned their placement understands both terrain and tactics." Emma nodded, studying the imagery more carefully. "The elevation advantage is significant. Any conventional approach would be observed long before reaching effective engagement. Range, exactly why they're bringing in specialists," Jovanovic said. "This isn't the kind of problem that standard infantry can solve." "What makes you so certain?" Emma asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Jovanovic gestured toward the display. "Look at the distances involved. 1,400 meters in mountainous terrain with variable weather conditions. That's beyond what most shooters can handle consistently, even with the best equipment." Emma considered his assessment. He wasn't wrong about the complexity, but his analysis seemed to focus primarily on the physical challenges rather than the intellectual ones. What about alternative approaches? Like what? Non-conventional positioning. Using terrain features to reduce apparent distance. Calculating solutions for atmospheric variables that others might consider prohibitive. Jovanovic frowned slightly. "Emma, this isn't a theoretical exercise. These are life and death calculations that require proven capability, not creative problem solving." The dismissal was polite but familiar. Even when discussing her areas of genuine strength, Emma found herself categorized as theoretical rather than practical. Her insights were interested in academic exercises, not serious tactical contributions. That evening, Emma returned to her secret training bunker with renewed purpose. She'd acquired detailed topographical maps of Sector Delta through her communications duties, and now she spread them across her makeshift desk. Alongside atmospheric data and ballistic charts, the enemy positions presented exactly the type of challenge she'd been preparing for: extreme range, complex environmental factors, and the need for first-shot accuracy under pressure. Working by lamplight, Emma calculated engagement solutions from multiple potential positions, factoring in variables that standard doctrine often overlooked. The mathematics were elegant in their complexity. Temperature gradients, atmospheric, pressure variations, wind speed changes at different elevations, all combining to create a targeting problem that demanded both theoretical knowledge and intuitive understanding. As she worked through the calculations, Emma felt the familiar frustration building. She possessed exactly the combination of skills needed for this mission: advanced mathematical capability, obsessive attention to environmental detail, and techniques specifically designed for extreme range precision. But none of that mattered if she remained categorized as communication support rather than a tactical asset. The specialized sniper team would arrive in 3 days. They would assess the situation, develop their approach, and execute the mission using conventional methods and established doctrine. And Emma would watch from the sidelines, monitoring radio communications, while knowing she could contribute far more than anyone imagined. But as she studied the terrain features and calculated wind patterns, Emma began to realize that conventional methods might not be sufficient for this particular challenge. The specialized sniper team arrived on a gray Thursday morning, their helicopter settling onto the landing pad with the confident precision of elite operators. Emma watched from the communications center as 4 soldiers disembarked, their movement efficient and professional as they carried equipment cases toward the command building. Staff Sergeant Viktor Kozinski led the team, his reputation preceding him throughout Camp Meridian. Emma had read his service record: 47 confirmed kills across 3 deployments, instructor credentials from the military's premier sniper school, and commendations for operations under extreme conditions. If anyone could handle the Sector Delta situation, conventional wisdom suggested it would be Kozinski's team. Emma's communications duties required her to establish encrypted channels for the specialist team, which gave her access to their initial assessment discussions. As she monitored equipment checks and frequency coordination, she listened to their evaluation of the tactical situation. Range cards show 1,380 meters from the optimal position, Kozinski reported to Major Petrovich. Challenging but manageable. With the Barrett systems, weather concerns? Petrovich asked. Wind patterns are variable but predictable. Temperature differential between our position and target elevation is approximately 15 degrees, within acceptable parameters for precision engagement. Emma frowned as she listened to their analysis. The team's assessment was competent, but seemed to overlook several critical factors she'd identified during her private study of the terrain. The wind patterns weren't just variable, they followed complex thermal cycles that created significant deflection issues at specific times of day. During the afternoon briefing, Emma sat in her usual spot as Kozinski outlined his team's operational plan. The approach was textbook perfect. Establish a concealed position at maximum effective range, account for environmental factors using standard calculation methods, and engage targets during optimal visibility conditions. Questions? Kozinski asked after completing his presentation. Emma raised her hand, then immediately questioned her decision. But the mathematical discrepancies in their plan were too significant to ignore. Sergeant, have you factored in the thermal inversion pattern specific to this terrain? Kozinski's expression shifted slightly, as if he wasn't certain whether to take the question seriously. Thermal inversions are accounted for in our standard environmental calculations, but the satellite data shows unusual thermal behavior in this valley system, Emma pressed. The temperature differentials create wind patterns that change every 4 hours, not the standard diurnal cycle. And you know this how? Kozinski asked, his tone carrying the edge of someone whose expertise was being questioned by an obviously junior soldier. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks but pressed forward. I've been studying the meteorological data for this region. The topography creates microclimates that affect ballistic solutions. Sergeant Major Volkov interrupted before Kozinski could respond. Kozlov, these men are specialists. They understand environmental factors better than anyone on this base. I'm sure they do, Emma replied carefully. I was just noting some unusual patterns in the atmospheric data that might be relevant. Kaczynski studied her for a moment, then nodded politely. We appreciate the input. Our team has extensive experience with mountain operations and will monitor conditions continuously. During the mission, as the briefing concluded, Emma overheard the conversation she'd been dreading. Who's the communications specialist with the meteorology theories? Kaczynski asked Volkov quietly. Kozlov. Talented with technical systems, but she has a tendency to overthink situations beyond her expertise. Academic type? Exactly. Reads too much, thinks she understands field operations better than the people actually conducting them. Emma gathered her materials and left the briefing room, the familiar sting of dismissal burning in her chest. Her analysis wasn't academic. Overthinking, it was detailed mathematical modeling based on specific environmental data. But presenting facts that contradicted expert assumptions apparently made her presumptuous rather than helpful. That night, Emma worked feverishly in her bunker, double-checking her calculations against the specialist's published approach. The discrepancies were significant enough to affect mission success, but she'd exhausted her credibility by questioning their initial assessment. The weather data was unambiguous. Temperature inversion patterns in the target valley created wind deflection issues that peaked during the late afternoon hours when Kaczynski's team planned to engage. Their standard environmental calculations underestimated deflection by nearly 15%, enough to mean the difference between hit and miss at extreme range. Emma drafted a detailed report outlining her concerns, complete with mathematical proofs and atmospheric modeling. But as she prepared to submit it through official channels, she hesitated. Her previous attempt to contribute had been politely dismissed. A formal report challenging the specialist's plan would likely be viewed as insubordination rather than valuable input. Instead, she approached Jovanovi during the evening meal, hoping for a more informal channel to share her concerns. Marco, can I ask you something about tomorrow's operation? He looked up from his food, surprised by her serious tone. What kind of something? Have you looked at the atmospheric data for the engagement window? That's not really my area, he replied. The specialists handle the technical calculations. But if you were making the shot, wouldn't you want to know about unusual wind patterns? Jovanovi set down his fork, studying her expression. Emma, what aren't you telling me? She took a deep breath and outlined her concerns about thermal inversions and wind deflection, showing him the mathematical relationships on paper. Jovanovi listened carefully, asking intelligent questions about her methodology and data sources. This is impressive analysis, he admitted. But why are you showing me instead of the specialist team? I tried during the briefing. They weren't particularly receptive to input from communications personnel. Can you blame them? Their reputation depends on successful missions. They can't afford to second-guess their methods based on theoretical concerns from someone without field experience. Emma felt the familiar frustration building. Mathematical accuracy isn't theoretical. Environmental factors follow predictable patterns regardless of who calculates them. Maybe, Jovanovi said carefully. But there's a difference between being right on paper and being right when lives are on the line. That night, Emma lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, knowing that tomorrow's mission would likely fail due to environmental factors that could be predicted and compensated for. But her warnings had been categorized as academic speculation rather than operational intelligence. She'd spent months preparing for exactly this type of scenario, developing skills and knowledge that could make the difference between mission success and failure. But preparation meant nothing if she remained invisible when her expertise was most needed. The mission launched at 0600 hours on a clear Friday morning, with Kaczynski's team moving toward their predetermined position while Emma monitored communications from the base command center. Atmospheric conditions were exactly as her calculations had predicted. Thermal inversions building in the valley system that would create significant wind deflection by late afternoon. Emma sat at her console, tracking radio communications and weather updates while trying to suppress the growing anxiety in her chest. Every atmospheric reading confirmed her analysis, but the specialist team remained committed to their original timeline and approach. "Base, this is Overwatch." Kaczynski's voice crackled through the radio at 1200 hours. "Position established. Beginning target assessment." "Copy, Overwatch," Major Petrovich responded. "Weather stations show stable conditions through your engagement window." Emma glanced at her private weather monitoring equipment, hidden beneath her standard communications gear. The thermal inversion was building precisely as predicted, creating wind patterns that would peak during the team's planned engagement time. "Overwatch, be advised thermal conditions may affect ballistic solutions after 1500 hours." Emma transmitted, using proper radio protocol. "Copy, base. Standard environmental monitoring is in effect." Emma closed her eyes, recognizing the polite dismissal in Kaczynski's tone. Her warning had been acknowledged, but not seriously considered. As the afternoon progressed, Emma tracked the developing weather patterns with increasing concern. Temperature differentials were creating exactly the wind deflection issues her calculations had predicted, but the specialist team's position prevented them from detecting the microclimate changes occurring in the target valley. At 1630 hours, the radio crackled with the engagement report. "Base, Overwatch engaging target 1." Emma held her breath, knowing the ballistic solution would be affected by wind conditions the team hadn't properly accounted for. "Miss, adjusting for wind deflection." "Target 2 engaging." Another pause, then frustration evident in Kaczynski's voice. "Miss, wind conditions more variable than anticipated." Emma keyed her microphone. "Overwatch recommend delaying engagement until evening thermal stabilization." "Negative, base. We're adjusting calculations for current conditions." "Target 3 engaging." The third miss prompted a longer pause before Kaczynski's next transmission. "Base, requesting updated atmospheric data. Wind patterns inconsistent with morning projections." Emma transmitted the detailed environmental analysis she'd prepared, including specific wind deflection calculations for the current thermal conditions. As the specialist team adjusted their approach based on her data, she felt a mixture of vindication and frustration. "Base, that atmospheric analysis was extremely helpful," Kaczynski transmitted an hour later. "Where did that level of detail come from?" "Specialist Kozlov has been monitoring microclimate patterns in your operational area," Major Petrovich replied. "Outstanding work, Kozlov. These thermal patterns weren't in our standard environmental briefings." Despite the recognition, Emma felt hollow as she monitored the mission's conclusion. The specialist team eventually succeeded, but only after significant delays and ammunition expenditure that could have been avoided with better initial planning. The after-action briefing that evening was professionally cordial, but Emma sensed underlying tension as Kaczynski reviewed the mission's challenges. "Environmental conditions were more complex than anticipated," he reported. "Standard atmospheric modeling failed to account for localized thermal patterns that significantly affected ballistic solutions." "But the mission was ultimately successful," Major Petrovich noted. "Yes, ma'am, but inefficiently. Better environmental intelligence could have prevented the initial targeting difficulties." Sergeant Major Volkov glanced toward Emma. "Kozlov provided updated atmospheric analysis that helped resolve the targeting issues." "Which raises the question," Kaczynski continued, "of why that level of environmental analysis wasn't available during mission planning." Emma felt every eye in the room turned toward her. "I attempted to provide atmospheric concerns during the initial briefing," she said carefully. "And those concerns were noted," Volkov replied. But questioning specialist methodology based on theoretical analysis isn't appropriate during operational planning. Theoretical? Kaczynski interjected. The environmental data specialist Kozlov provided was more accurate than our standard intelligence. That suggests practical expertise, not theoretical speculation. Emma appreciated Kaczynski's defense, but she could see the discomfort it created among the base leadership. Her success in identifying critical environmental factors highlighted shortcomings in the mission planning process. After the briefing, Kaczynski approached Emma privately. That atmospheric analysis was impressive work. Where did you develop that level of expertise? Personal study, Emma replied. I've been analyzing environmental factors affecting precision shooting as a way to understand the technical challenges. Have you had opportunities to apply that knowledge practically? Emma hesitated, then decided on honesty. Limited opportunities. My assignments have focused on communications rather than precision shooting, Kaczynski frowned. That seems like a waste of talent. Environmental analysis is critical for long-range precision work, and what you provided today was specialist level. Quality. Thank you, Sergeant. That means a lot coming from someone with your experience. I'm going to recommend that battalion consider expanding your role in precision operations, Kaczynski said. Environmental specialists with your analytical capability are rare, and today proved how valuable that expertise can be. Emma felt a surge of hope, followed immediately by familiar skepticism. Recommendations from visiting specialists didn't always translate to changes in local assignment policies, especially when those policies were based on assumptions about physical capabilities rather than intellectual ones. That night in her bunker, Emma reflected on the day's mixed success. Her environmental analysis had proven critical for mission completion, earning recognition from a respected specialist. But the underlying dynamic remained unchanged. Her expertise was valued only after conventional approaches failed. She'd spent months developing capabilities that extended far beyond environmental analysis, mastering techniques that could revolutionize precision shooting in complex terrain. But those skills remained hidden, deemed irrelevant by leaders who couldn't imagine scenarios where her unique combination of intelligence and determination might prove essential. As she updated her training logs and ballistic calculations, Emma wondered what it would take to move beyond advisory roles into operational responsibility. Because environmental analysis, while important, was only the beginning of what she could contribute to precision operations. The real test would come when situations demanded not just intellectual support, but the courage to act when conventional expertise proved insufficient. The intelligence briefing 2 weeks later carried an urgency that made everyone in the room sit straighter. Colonel Marcus Brennan, the regional commander, stood before a digital display showing aerial reconnaissance that made Emma's stomach tighten with apprehension. Gentlemen and Specialist Kozlov, Brennan began, nodding toward Emma's position near the communications station. We have a developing crisis in Sector Echo that requires immediate response. The satellite imagery showed a remote valley where enemy forces had taken control of a strategic observation post. But this wasn't another targeting mission. Red markers on the display indicated hostage situations that transformed the tactical calculations entirely. 24 hours ago, enemy forces overran forward observation post Zebra, Brennan continued. They're holding 6 NATO personnel, including a high-value intelligence officer with sensitive operational knowledge. Emma leaned forward, studying the terrain features she recognized from her private mapping studies. The observation post sat on a narrow plateau surrounded by steep canyon walls, defensible terrain that would make conventional rescue operations extremely hazardous. Intelligence suggests the hostages will be moved within 48 hours, Brennan continued. After that, recovery becomes significantly more difficult, and the intelligence exposure becomes unacceptable. Major Petrovich raised her hand. Sir, what's the tactical assessment for rescue operations? Challenging, Brennan replied grimly. The position is naturally fortified, with excellent visibility in all directions. Enemy forces have established overlapping fields of fire that make conventional approach impossible. Staff Sergeant Mueller studied the display. What about air support? Weather conditions prohibit helicopter operations for the next 72 hours. Mountain winds and cloud cover make aviation assets ineffective. Emma felt her pulse accelerate as she recognized the tactical puzzle taking shape. This was exactly the type of scenario she'd been studying, a precision operation in extreme terrain where conventional approaches were inadequate. The good news, Brennan continued, is that a specialist rescue team is en route from headquarters. 18 hours. They'll assess the situation and develop an operational plan. And if 18 hours is too late? Sergeant Major Volkov asked. Then we face the possibility of losing both personnel and critical intelligence, Brennan replied. Which is why I'm also exploring alternative approaches. Emma found herself studying the tactical display with renewed intensity. The enemy position was formidable against conventional assault, but it had vulnerabilities that specialized precision fire could exploit. Elimination of key defensive positions could create opportunities for rescue that direct assault couldn't. Achieved. After the briefing, Emma approached the display for detailed study. The observation post's defensive layout was textbook effective, positioned to maximize natural advantages while minimizing exposure to standard military tactics. Thinking about the tactical problem? Kaczynski's voice came from behind her. Emma turned, surprised to see the specialist who'd returned to Camp Meridian for additional operations. It's a complex situation, she replied. Complex is putting it mildly, Kaczynski said, joining her at the display. That position is perfectly placed to counter conventional rescue approaches. What about unconventional approaches? Emma asked. Kaczynski frowned thoughtfully. Such as? Emma gestured toward the terrain features. The defensive positions assume assault from predictable directions. But precision fire from unexpected angles could neutralize key positions without exposing rescue personnel. You're talking about extreme range shooting in mountainous terrain with zero margin for error, Kaczynski replied. That's beyond what most specialists would attempt. But not beyond what's theoretically possible, Emma said quietly. Kaczynski studied her expression. Emma, this isn't environmental analysis. This is life and death tactical planning where failure means people die. Which is exactly why unconventional solutions might be necessary, she replied. If conventional approaches were sufficient, we wouldn't need to wait for specialist teams. What are you suggesting? Emma hesitated, knowing her next words would cross a line she couldn't uncross. I've been developing precision shooting techniques specifically designed for extreme terrain and unusual conditions. The tactical situation at Observation Post Zebra represents exactly the type of challenge those techniques were designed to address. Kaczynski stared at her in silence for several seconds. You're talking about conducting precision shooting operations. Yourself. I'm talking about having capabilities that might be relevant to the current crisis, Emma replied carefully. Emma, you're communications personnel. You don't have certification for precision shooting operations, and you've never been tested under operational stress. But I have been preparing, she said, her voice growing stronger. For months, I've been developing skills in studying scenarios exactly like this one. Mathematical modeling, environmental analysis, precision techniques adapted for extreme conditions. Theoretical preparation isn't the same as operational capability, Kaczynski replied. And suggesting that you could handle what specialist rescue teams consider extremely challenging verges on presumptuous. Emma felt the familiar burn of dismissal, but this time it carried additional weight. People were going to die while everyone waited for conventional solutions that might not arrive in time. I understand your skepticism, she said quietly. But if the specialist team doesn't arrive in time, or if their conventional approach fails, those hostages are going to die. At that point, wouldn't unconventional capabilities be worth considering? Kozinski studied her intently. Even if your skills were adequate, which is a significant assumption, military protocol doesn't allow unauthorized personnel to conduct precision operations. Even when lives are at stake? Especially when lives are at stake, Kozinski replied. Because good intentions don't compensate for inadequate training when people's survival depends on your accuracy. That evening, Emma sat in her bunker surrounded by detailed maps of Sector Echo, calculating engagement solutions for a mission she'd never be allowed to attempt. The mathematics were challenging but solvable, extreme range shooting through variable atmospheric conditions with first-shot accuracy, requirements that left no margin for error, but mathematical solutions meant nothing if she remained categorized as theoretical support rather than operational capability. As she worked through ballistic calculations and environmental factors, Emma realized that proving her worth might require more than just being prepared. It might require being willing to act when conventional wisdom suggested such action was impossible. The emergency alarm shattered the pre-dawn quiet of Camp Meridian at 0347 hours, its piercing wail pulling Emma from restless sleep into immediate alertness. She'd been dreaming about ballistic trajectories and wind calculations, her subconscious mind still working through the tactical challenges of observation post-zebra, even during sleep. Within minutes, personnel were rushing toward the command center as urgent radio chatter filled the air. Emma grabbed her communications gear and joined the stream of soldiers converging on the briefing room, her heart hammering with the certainty that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Colonel Brennan stood at the front of the hastily assembled crowd, his face grim in the harsh fluorescent lighting. "I'll make this brief," he announced. "The specialist rescue team has been delayed indefinitely due to equipment failure and weather conditions. ETA is now unknown, potentially 72 hours or more." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. 72 hours was far beyond the timeline they'd been given for hostage extraction. "Intelligence indicates enemy forces are accelerating their timeline," Brennan continued. "We now have approximately 18 hours before the hostages are moved to a secondary location, where recovery will become nearly impossible." Sergeant Major Volkov raised his hand. "Sir, what are our alternative options?" "Limited," Brennan replied. Bluntly, conventional assault would result in unacceptable casualties, and we lack the specialized equipment for technical rescue operations. Battalion is exploring diplomatic channels, but those efforts are unlikely to succeed within our timeline. Emma listened to the discussion with growing horror as the reality of the situation became clear. The hostages were going to die, and everyone in the room knew it. Not from enemy action, but from the simple fact that conventional military capabilities were insufficient for the tactical challenge they faced. "Questions?" Brennan asked. Emma raised her hand before she could stop herself. "Sir, has consideration been given to precision elimination of key defensive positions to create rescue opportunities?" The room fell silent. Brennan studied her with an expression she couldn't read. "Specialist Kozlov, precision operations require specialized personnel and equipment that we don't currently have available." "But if such capabilities were available," Emma pressed, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, "would that approach be tactically viable?" "Theoretical capabilities don't solve operational problems," Volkov interjected. "We need concrete solutions, not academic speculation." Emma felt the familiar dismissal, but this time it carried lethal consequences. "Sir, I wasn't speaking theoretically." The silence that followed her statement was deafening. Every eye in the room turned toward her, expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief to something approaching pity. "Kozlov," Brennan said carefully, "what exactly are you suggesting?" Emma took a deep breath. knowing her next words would either save lives or end her military career. I have the skills and equipment necessary to conduct precision elimination of the defensive positions at observation post Zebra. The room erupted in murmurs and skeptical glances. Sergeant Major Volkov's expression shifted from confusion to irritation. "Specialist, your communications personnel," he said sharply. "You've never been qualified for precision shooting operations." "I've been developing those capabilities independently," Emma replied. "For months, I've been training, specifically for extreme-range precision shooting in mountainous terrain." "Training where?" Volkov demanded. "With whose authorization? Using what equipment?" Emma felt the weight of her secret preparation pressing down on her. "Personal training, personal equipment, personal time. All within regulations regarding individual skill development." Colonel Brennan raised a hand for silence. "Kozlov, even if your claims are accurate, unauthorized personnel cannot conduct precision operations. The liability and command responsibility issues alone make such action impossible." "Sir," Emma said quietly, "what's the liability of watching 6 people die when we have capabilities to save them?" "That's not your decision to make," Brennan replied. "Military operations require proper authorization, qualified personnel, and adherence to established protocols. And when established protocols result in preventable deaths?" Emma asked. The question hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Emma could see the moral conflict playing across Brennan's face, the tension between military discipline and human life, between following regulations and accepting consequences. "Dismissed," Brennan announced. "All personnel return to standard duties while we continue exploring alternatives." As the crowd dispersed, Emma remained seated, staring at the tactical display that showed red markers representing 6 people who would die because her capabilities were deemed irrelevant by people who couldn't imagine solutions beyond conventional doctrine. Kaczynski approached her as the room emptied. "Emma, what you suggested in there was career suicide. And doing nothing is literal suicide for those hostages," she replied. "You can't seriously be considering unauthorized action." Emma looked at him directly. "I'm considering what happens if I don't act. 6 people die, including an intelligence officer, whose capture compromises ongoing operations. All because we're too rigid to consider capabilities that don't fit standard organizational charts." "Emma, listen to me," Kaczynski said urgently. "Even if your skills are everything you claim, conducting unauthorized precision operations would be court-martial material. You'd be throwing away your career for an extremely low probability of success. And if I don't try, the probability of success is 0. Emma replied. She stood and gathered her equipment, her mind already moving toward the decision she'd been avoiding since the crisis began. The military hierarchy had made its position clear: conventional solutions or no solutions at all. But as Emma walked toward her quarters, she carried with her the image of 6 people waiting for rescue that would never come through official channels. People who would die not from enemy action, but from institutional inflexibility that couldn't recognize capabilities outside established norms. In her room, Emma sat on her bunk and stared at her hands. Small hands that everyone dismissed as inadequate for precision work. Hands that had spent months developing skills specifically designed for situations exactly like this one. The choice before her was simple in its complexity: follow orders and watch people die, or act without authorization and risk everything on abilities that no one believed she possessed. As dawn approached through her window, Emma realized the choice had already been made the moment she began her secret training. She'd been preparing for this decision without knowing it, developing capabilities for exactly this type of moral crossroads. Emma waited until 0200 hours before moving toward her secret bunker, when the base had settled into its quietest operational rhythm. The weight of her decision pressed against her chest like a physical force, but beneath the anxiety was something she hadn't felt in months. Absolute clarity of purpose. The abandoned bunker felt different tonight, transformed from training ground to operational command center. Emma spread her detailed maps of Sector Echo across the makeshift table, overlaying them with atmospheric data, ballistic charts, and engagement solutions she'd calculated during the long hours since the morning briefing. The tactical challenge was extraordinary by any standard. The observation post sat 1,847 meters from the nearest feasible shooting position, with elevation changes that created complex ballistic solutions. Environmental factors included variable mountain winds, temperature differentials, and atmospheric pressure changes that would affect bullet trajectory significantly. But Emma had been preparing for exactly this scenario, developing techniques that turned conventional limitations into strategic advantages. Her smaller size allowed shooting positions that larger soldiers couldn't access. Her mathematical background enabled ballistic calculations that pushed beyond standard doctrine. Her obsessive preparation had created solutions for variables that traditional training didn't address. Working by lamplight, Emma assembled her equipment with the methodical precision of someone who understood that every detail could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. The modified rifle she'd been secretly maintaining was built for extreme range precision, its components carefully selected and tested during countless hours of private practice. Her ballistic computer contained atmospheric data and trajectory calculations specific to the target terrain. Wind meters, rangefinders, and environmental sensors were calibrated for the microclimate conditions she'd studied obsessively. Every piece of equipment represented months of careful acquisition and modification. The operational plan was elegant in its simplicity. Emma would infiltrate to within effective range of the observation post, establish a concealed position with clear sight lines to the enemy defensive positions, and eliminate key targets with precision fire that would create opportunities for hostage rescue. The timing was critical. She needed to reach position, conduct the operation, and extract before dawn. Patrol schedules brought additional enemy forces into the area. Total operational window: 6 hours from infiltration to extraction. Emma checked her watch. 0247 hours. If she moved immediately, she could reach the operational area before first light, conduct reconnaissance, and be in position for engagement during optimal atmospheric conditions. She sealed her equipment into a specialized pack designed for mountain operations, then paused to review the letter she'd written to her sister back in Prague. Unlike her previous letter, this one didn't explain her motivations. Those had become self-evident. Instead, it simply stated that she loved her family and believed some risks were worth taking when other people's lives hung in the balance. The infiltration route she'd planned avoided all standard patrol areas and checkpoint locations. Emma had studied base security protocols during her communications duties, identifying blind spots and timing patterns that would allow unauthorized departure without detection. The equipment depot checkpoint was managed by Private Novak, whose attention to detail was notoriously poor during late-night shifts. Emma approached with standard maintenance paperwork, her confident demeanor suggesting routine equipment inspection rather than unauthorized mission preparation. "Evening, Novak," she said quietly, clipboard in hand. "Need to check the backup communication gear for the morning briefing." Novak glanced up from his magazine, noted her familiar face and official-looking paperwork, then nodded without interest. "Make it quick, Kozlov. I'm supposed to log all after-hours access." 5 minutes, Emma replied, already moving past the checkpoint toward the storage areas. The perimeter breach was more challenging, requiring her to bypass motion sensors and security cameras using techniques she'd studied, but never attempted in practice. The fence line was designed to prevent unauthorized entry, not exit, but the principles were similar enough that her theoretical knowledge translated to practical application. 23 minutes after leaving her quarters, Emma was moving through mountain terrain toward observation post Zebra, carrying equipment that represented months of secret preparation and skills that no one believed she possessed. The hike was grueling, with elevation changes and rocky terrain that demanded both physical conditioning and route-finding expertise. Emma had prepared for exactly these conditions, building endurance through countless hours of mountain training that she'd disguised as recreational hiking. As she climbed higher into the mountains, Emma reflected on the magnitude of what she was attempting. Unauthorized military operations violated every regulation regarding chain of command and operational authority. If she succeeded, she'd face court-martial for conduct that saved lives, but destroyed military discipline. If she failed, 6 people would die and her career would end in disgrace. But as she navigated the treacherous mountain terrain, Emma realized that the alternative, watching people die while possessing capabilities to save them, was unacceptable. Regardless of consequences, the mathematics of the operation were complex but manageable. The physical demands were extreme, but within her capabilities. The tactical requirements were unprecedented, but solvable using techniques she'd developed specifically for situations that conventional training didn't address. 3 hours into the infiltration, Emma reached the reconnaissance position she'd selected from satellite imagery. The observation post was visible in the distance, its defensive positions clearly outlined by enemy lighting. Through her spotting scope, she could see movement patterns that confirmed intelligence reports about hostage locations and guard rotations. Shooting position she'd calculated was another kilometer upslope, positioned to provide optimal sight lines while remaining concealed from enemy observation. Emma began the final approach, knowing that once she established her firing position, there would be no possibility of retreat without completing the mission. As she climbed toward her chosen position, Emma carried with her not just equipment and ammunition, but the weight of proving that conventional wisdom about limitations could be wrong when stakes demanded impossible solutions. The hostages were depending on capabilities that officially didn't exist, conducted by someone officially unqualified. Using techniques officially impossible. In 6 hours, Emma would discover whether months of secret preparation could accomplish what everyone believed was beyond her reach. The final approach to her shooting position tested every skill Emma had developed during months of mountain training. The terrain was a nightmare of loose scree and vertical rock faces, made more treacherous by darkness and the need for absolute silence. Enemy listening posts were positioned to detect conventional approaches, but Emma's route followed geological features that masked sound and movement. At 0534 hours, she reached the concealed position she'd identified through obsessive study of satellite imagery. The location was a natural hide created by weathered granite formations, providing excellent concealment while offering clear sight lines to the observation post 1,847 meters below. Emma established her shooting position with methodical precision, every movement guided by training that no one knew she possessed. The rifle bipod was positioned to maximize stability while accommodating the extreme downward angle. Range cards were clipped within easy reach, marked with atmospheric corrections and target priorities. Through her spotting scope, the observation post resolved into clear tactical detail. Enemy defensive positions were exactly as intelligence had indicated. 3 heavy weapon emplacements covering approach routes, with overlapping fields of fire that made conventional assault impossible. But Emma's position overlooked vulnerabilities that ground-level assault couldn't exploit. The defensive layout assumed threats from predictable directions, leaving exposure angles that extreme-range precision fire could target. Emma activated her ballistic computer and began inputting environmental data. Atmospheric pressure, 24.67 inches of mercury. Temperature, 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind speed, variable 8 to 12 knots from the northwest. Humidity, 67%. Each variable affected trajectory calculations that would determine success or failure. First target was the heavy machine gun position covering the main approach route. Elimination of that position would create a corridor for potential rescue operations, while alerting other defensive positions to adjust their tactics. Emma settled behind her rifle and began the breathing sequence that preceded every precision shot. The crosshairs found their target through morning haze that was beginning to lift as dawn approached. Range, 1,847 meters. Elevation correction, 47.3 minutes of angle. Wind deflection, 3.2 minutes left. The mathematical certainty of ballistic calculation merged with intuitive understanding developed through countless hours of practice. Emma's finger found the trigger and began the smooth, steady pressure that preceded engagement. The rifle's report echoed across the valley like thunder, its sound magnified by the mountain terrain. Through her scope, Emma watched the .50 caliber round impact exactly where her calculations had predicted, eliminating the machine gun position with surgical precision. Immediate response from the remaining defensive positions confirmed the tactical impact. Enemy personnel scrambled to adjust their coverage, creating exactly the confusion Emma had calculated would occur. Target 2 was a sniper position that covered the eastern approach route. Emma adjusted her aim point for the new range and atmospheric conditions, her movements smooth and automatic despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The second shot impacted 3 seconds after the first, eliminating another key defensive position. Enemy response was more coordinated now, with remaining personnel seeking cover while attempting to locate the source of precision fire. Target 3 presented the most challenging shot, a command bunker where enemy leadership was coordinating defensive operations. The range was at the extreme limit of effective engagement, requiring compensation for atmospheric variables that pushed beyond standard ballistic tables. Emma made minute adjustments to her scope and recalculated wind deflection based on real-time observations. The mathematical solution was elegant in its complexity, accounting for variables that conventional training considered prohibitive. The third shot required a 7-second flight time, during which atmospheric conditions could change significantly. Emma controlled her breathing and executed the shot with perfect follow-through, watching through her scope as the round traveled across impossible distance to impact with devastating accuracy. The observation post's defensive capability was now effectively neutralized, creating opportunities for rescue operations that hadn't existed minutes earlier. But Emma's mission was only half complete. She needed to extract from her position and return to base before enemy reinforcements arrived. As she packed her equipment, Emma's radio crackled with intercepted enemy communications. Their confusion was evident as they struggled to understand how precision fire had reached them from impossible range. Reports indicated 3 dead and several wounded, with defensive positions compromised beyond immediate repair. The extraction was more dangerous than infiltration, requiring movement through terrain that would soon be swarming with enemy search teams. Emma followed a route she'd planned for exactly this contingency, using geological features and timing to avoid detection while covering maximum distance. 2 hours into the extraction, her radio intercepted NATO communications indicating successful rescue operations at the observation post. The hostages were safe, extracted through corridors that Emma's precision fire had created. As she descended toward Camp Meridian through morning sunlight, Emma reflected on the magnitude of what she'd accomplished. 3 precision shots at extreme range and variable conditions, each one executed with mathematical perfection and tactical effectiveness that had saved 6 lives. But she also understood the consequences waiting for her. Unauthorized military operations, violation of direct orders, and conduct that challenged fundamental assumptions about command authority and operational capability. Emma reached the base perimeter at 0847 hours, infiltrating through the same security gaps she'd used for departure. Her equipment was concealed and her cover story prepared, but she knew that investigation would eventually reveal her unauthorized absence. The morning briefing was already in session when she arrived at the command center, slipping into her usual position near the communication station. Colonel Brennan was discussing the successful hostage rescue with evident relief and confusion. Preliminary reports indicate enemy defensive positions were eliminated by precision fire from unknown sources, he announced. This created opportunities that allowed rescue operations to succeed ahead of schedule. Emma listened to the discussion with mixed emotions. The mission had succeeded beyond all expectations, but the questions about unauthorized precision fire would eventually lead to investigation that would expose her actions. Sergeant Major Volkov approached her after the briefing. "Kozlov, where were you during this morning's emergency formation?" "Equipment maintenance in the communication center," Emma replied. Using the cover story she'd prepared, Volkov studied her expression. "Any idea who might have conducted unauthorized precision operations in Sector Echo?" Emma met his gaze directly. "No, Sergeant Major. I have no information about unauthorized operations." But as she returned to her duties, Emma knew that her secret was temporary. Investigation would reveal evidence of her actions, and consequences would follow that would test whether saving lives justified violating regulations. For now, 6 people were alive who would have died without her intervention. That knowledge was worth whatever consequences awaited her discovery. The investigation began within hours of the successful hostage rescue, led by Major Petrovich with methodical efficiency that Emma had both expected and dreaded. As the communications specialist who'd been monitoring radio traffic during the operation, Emma found herself interviewed about intercepted enemy transmissions and NATO response coordination. The precision fire that eliminated enemy positions was extraordinary, Petrovich noted, reviewing tactical reports from the rescue team. 3 shots at extreme range with perfect accuracy. That level of marksmanship suggests elite specialist capabilities. Emma nodded, maintaining the neutral expression she'd practiced. The rescue team reported clear approach routes that hadn't existed before the enemy positions were eliminated. Exactly. Which raises questions about who possessed both the skills and equipment necessary for such precision work. Petrovich studied Emma carefully. "Any theories about possible sources?" "I wouldn't want to speculate about operational capabilities beyond my expertise," Emma replied. As the day progressed, Emma continued her standard duties while monitoring the expanding investigation. Security footage was being reviewed, personnel movements tracked, and equipment inventories conducted with increasing intensity. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Major Volkov discovered discrepancies in the equipment depot logs. Private Novak's casual attitude toward after-hours access had created gaps in accountability that raised immediate red flags. "Kozlov," Volkov called during the afternoon briefing. "I need to discuss your equipment access last night." Emma felt her pulse accelerate but kept her voice steady. "What kind of access, Sergeant Major?" "Novak logged you entering the depot at 0247 hours for communication equipment inspection. But there's no record of what equipment was accessed or why that inspection was necessary." "Routine maintenance check," Emma replied. "I wanted to verify backup systems before the morning briefing." "And this required 2 hours of equipment access?" Emma realized her timeline estimates had been optimistic. The backup systems hadn't been tested recently. "I wanted to ensure complete operational readiness." Volkov's expression suggested skepticism. But before he could probe further, Colonel Brennan interrupted with new intelligence from the rescue operation. "Gentlemen, we have confirmation that the precision fire came from a position over 1,800 meters from the target area," Brennan announced. "Ballistic analysis indicates extraordinary accuracy with .50 caliber rounds under challenging atmospheric conditions." Staff Sergeant Mueller frowned. Sir, that's beyond the capability of most specialist snipers. The environmental factors alone would make such shots extremely difficult. Which is why this investigation has become a priority, Brennan replied. We need to identify who conducted this operation and why they acted without authorization. Emma listened to the discussion with growing certainty that discovery was inevitable. The ballistic evidence would be matched against available equipment, personnel movements would be reconstructed, and her unauthorized absence would be documented despite her attempts at concealment. The confrontation came that evening when Kaczynski approached her during the mess hall dinner. His expression was thoughtful rather than accusatory, but Emma sensed that her time had run out. Emma, can we discuss yesterday's operation privately? She followed him to a quiet corner of the facility, her heart hammering against her ribs. What operation, Sergeant? The precision fire that saved 6 lives, Kaczynski said quietly. I've been reviewing the ballistic evidence, and I have some questions about your whereabouts during the relevant time frame. Emma considered maintaining her cover story, but Kaczynski's tone suggested he already knew the truth. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests someone with exceptional mathematical skills and specialized equipment conducted an operation that officially never happened, he replied. Someone who'd been preparing for exactly this type of scenario through months of private training. Emma studied his expression, trying to gauge whether this was interrogation or something else. That would be an extraordinary accusation. It would also be an extraordinary accomplishment, Kaczynski said. The person who made those shots saved 6 lives using skills that no one believed they possessed. And what would happen to someone who conducted unauthorized operations? Emma asked carefully. Officially? Court-martial for violating direct orders and conducting unauthorized military operations. Kaczynski paused. Unofficially? They'd be recognized as someone who proved that conventional assumptions about capability can be wrong when lives are at stake. Emma felt the weight of decision pressing down on her again. Denial might preserve her career, but would leave questions unanswered about capabilities that could save lives in future crises. Admission would end her military service, but might create opportunities for others like her. Hypothetically, she said quietly, what would you recommend to someone facing that choice? Hypothetically, Kaczynski replied, I'd tell them that the military needs soldiers who can exceed expectations when conventional solutions fail, and that sometimes proving your worth requires accepting consequences that seem unfair. That night, Emma sat in her quarters composing the letter that would end her secret and possibly her career. The confession was detailed and mathematically precise, outlining her months of preparation, her unauthorized operation, and her willingness to accept responsibility for actions that violated regulations, but saved lives. As she sealed the letter, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Months of dismissal and underestimation had led to secret preparation that had enabled impossible achievement under pressure that would have crushed conventional approaches. The investigation would conclude with her confession, leading to consequences that would test whether the military could recognize exceptional capability, even when it violated institutional expectations. But 6 people were alive who would have died without her intervention. And somewhere in the command structure, leaders would have to decide whether proven capability mattered more than rigid adherence to protocol. Emma submitted her confession at 08:00 hours the following morning, knowing that her secret training was over and her real test was just beginning. The consequences would determine whether exceptional soldiers could find recognition within institutions designed to enforce conformity, or whether proving your worth required accepting punishment for refusing to accept limitations. The letter sat on Colonel Brennan's desk like an unexploded ordnance, its contents having already detonated through the command structure of Camp Meridian. Emma stood at attention in his office, flanked by Major Petrov and Sergeant Major Volkov, their expressions ranging from professional concern to barely contained outrage. Specialist Kozlov, Brennan began, his voice carefully controlled. Your confession raises serious questions about military discipline, operational security, and chain of command authority. Emma kept her eyes focused straight ahead. Yes, sir. You admit to conducting unauthorized precision operations in violation of direct orders? Yes, sir. You admit to acquiring specialized equipment without proper authorization and conducting training outside established protocols? Yes, sir. Sergeant Major Volkov stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Kozlov, do you understand the magnitude of what you've done? You've violated every principle of military discipline. You've made unauthorized use of military equipment. You've conducted operations that could have resulted in international incidents. I understand the regulatory violations, Sergeant Major, Emma replied quietly. Regulatory violations? Volkov's voice rose. These aren't parking tickets, Specialist. This is conduct that undermines the entire structure of military authority. Major Petrovich raised a hand for calm. Kozlov, help us understand your thought process. What made you believe you had the authority to conduct independent military operations? Emma had rehearsed this moment during the sleepless night following her confession. Ma'am, I believe that 6 people would die without immediate action, and I possessed capabilities that could prevent those deaths. That's not your decision to make, Brennan interjected. Military operations require proper authorization, regardless of individual assessment of necessity. Sir, what's the proper authorization for watching people die when you have the ability to save them? The question hung in the air like gunsmoke. Emma could see the moral conflict playing across Brennan's face, the tension between institutional authority and ethical obligation. The proper authorization, Volkov said sharply, is following orders from your commanding officers, not deciding for yourself which missions to conduct. Even when following orders results in preventable deaths? Emma asked. Especially then, Volkov replied. Because the moment soldiers start deciding which orders to follow, military discipline collapses entirely. Emma felt the familiar frustration building, but this time it carried different weight. Her unauthorized operation had succeeded beyond all expectations, proving capabilities that institutional thinking had deemed impossible. But that success was being framed as dangerous precedent, rather than valuable capability. Kozlov, Brennan said, consulting the papers on his desk, the ballistic evidence from your operation is extraordinary. The precision required for those shots exceeds what most specialist snipers could achieve under similar conditions. Thank you, sir. That's not a compliment, Brennan continued. It's an indication of how dangerous your unauthorized capabilities represent. If you possess that level of skill, why wasn't it identified through proper channels? Emma considered her response carefully. Because proper channels assumed I lacked the physical characteristics necessary for precision shooting, sir. My capabilities were never tested because they were deemed theoretically impossible. Major Petrovich frowned. Are you suggesting that your assessment procedures were inadequate? I'm suggesting that assumptions about physical limitations prevented recognition of actual capabilities, Emma replied. Or, Volkov interjected, you developed these capabilities through unauthorized training while neglecting your assigned duties. My assigned duties were completed to standard, Sergeant Major. My additional training was conducted during personal time using personal resources. Resources that included military-grade precision equipment, Volkov pointed out. Equipment purchased through legal channels and maintained according to regulations, Emma replied. The interrogation continued for another hour, covering every aspect of Emma's unauthorized preparation and operational execution. The questions were thorough and pointed, designed to establish clear violations of military protocol while documenting the extraordinary effectiveness of her actions. Finally, Colonel Brennan leaned back in his chair and studied Emma with an expression she couldn't interpret. Specialist Kozlov, your actions represent a fundamental challenge to military authority and operational protocol. Regardless of their effectiveness, they cannot be overlooked or excused. I understand, sir. Do you? Because I'm not certain you grasp the precedent your actions would set if they went unpunished. Every soldier who disagreed with orders could point to your success as justification for independent action. Emma felt the weight of institutional pressure bearing down on her. Sir, I'm not suggesting that soldiers should routinely ignore orders. I'm suggesting that exceptional circumstances might require exceptional responses. And who determines what constitutes exceptional circumstances? Brennan asked. You? Every individual soldier based on their personal assessment. People who possess relevant capabilities when institutional responses prove inadequate, Emma replied. The room fell. Silent, Emma could see that her response had touched the heart of the institutional challenge her actions represented. Military effectiveness depended on hierarchical authority, but that same hierarchy could prevent recognition of capabilities that didn't fit established categories. Kozlov, Brennan said finally, you're confined to quarters pending formal disciplinary proceedings. This matter will be referred to higher command for determination of appropriate consequences. As Emma was escorted from the office, she reflected on the institutional trap she'd exposed. Her success in saving lives had proved capabilities that officially didn't exist, creating a situation where punishment would be based on violating authority rather than operational effectiveness. But 6 people were alive because she'd refused to accept limitations that others had imposed. Whatever consequences followed, that fact would remain unchanged. The disciplinary hearing convened in the base conference room 3 days later, presided over by a board of officers that included representatives from regional command and the Inspector General's office. Emma sat at a small table facing the panel, her dress uniform crisp, despite the circumstances that had brought her before military justice. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Hayes, the senior officer present, reviewed the charges with methodical precision. Specialist Kozlov, you stand accused of conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, unauthorized use of military resources, violation of direct orders, and conducting military operations without proper authorization. I understand the charges, ma'am, Emma replied. How do you plead? Guilty to all charges as stated, ma'am. A murmur ran through the small gallery of observers. Most military defendants attempted to negotiate or minimize charges, but Emma's straightforward admission eliminated any ambiguity about her actions. Specialist, Hayes continued, given your plea, this hearing will focus on determining appropriate consequences for your acknowledged violations. Do you wish to make a statement before we hear testimony? Emma stood, her hands steady despite the gravity of the moment. Ma'am, I acknowledge violating regulations and conducting unauthorized precision operations. I don't dispute the charges or deny responsibility for my actions. But, Hayes prompted, sensing unfinished thoughts. But I also don't regret saving 6 lives when institutional responses proved inadequate, Emma said quietly. Military discipline is important, but it shouldn't be more important than the lives we're sworn to protect. The effectiveness of your actions doesn't excuse their unauthorized nature, Hayes replied. Military discipline exists to prevent exactly the kind of individual decision-making you exhibited. Even when that decision-making proves more effective than authorized approaches, Emma asked. Especially then, Hayes said firmly, because exceptional results achieved through improper means create dangerous precedents for military authority. The hearing proceeded with testimony from base personnel, including Colonel Brennan's account of the crisis situation and Emma's unauthorized response. Sergeant Major Volkov testified about the regulatory violations and their implications for military discipline, but the testimony that surprised everyone came from Sergeant Kaczynski, who'd requested permission to address the board about operational aspects of Emma's actions. Ma'am, Kaczynski told Hayes, I've reviewed the ballistic evidence from Specialist Kozlov's operation. The precision required for those shots represents capabilities that would be valuable in future operations. That's not the issue before this board, Hayes replied. We're determining consequences for unauthorized actions, not evaluating their effectiveness. With respect, ma'am, shouldn't capability assessment be relevant to personnel management decisions? Hayes frowned. Are you suggesting that exceptional performance excuses violation of regulations? I'm suggesting that exceptional capabilities might warrant exceptional consideration, Kaczynski replied carefully. Specialist Kozlov has demonstrated skills that could be valuable if properly channeled through authorized programs. Or properly punished to prevent other soldiers from believing they can ignore orders when they disagree with command decisions. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison interjected from the panel. The debate continued throughout the morning, with testimony revealing the complexity of balancing military discipline against operational effectiveness. Emma's actions had clearly violated regulations, but they'd also demonstrated capabilities that conventional assessment had failed to identify. During the lunch break, Emma was approached by Captain Rebecca Chen, a JAG officer who'd been observing the proceedings. Specialist, off the record, what you accomplished was extraordinary, Chen said quietly. But you understand that military justice can't simply overlook regulatory violations based on successful outcomes? I understand the institutional position, Emma replied. But I also understand that people died while we waited for authorized solutions that never materialized. The system has to maintain authority, Chen continued. Otherwise, every soldier becomes their own commanding officer. And if the system's authority prevents recognition of capabilities that could save lives? Emma asked. Chen studied her thoughtfully. That's a question above my pay grade. But it's one that your case is forcing people to consider. The afternoon session focused on potential consequences, ranging from reprimand and demotion to discharge from military service. Each option carried different implications for Emma's future and for institutional precedent regarding unauthorized but effective actions. Specialist Kozlov, Hayes said as the hearing concluded, this board will deliberate and provide recommendations to higher command. Given the unprecedented nature of your case, final determination may require review at levels beyond this installation. I understand, ma'am. I hope you do. Because your actions have created a situation that challenges fundamental assumptions about military authority and individual initiative. As Emma was escorted back to her quarters, she reflected on the institutional dilemma her success had created. Military effectiveness required both discipline and capability, but those requirements sometimes conflicted when institutional thinking failed to recognize unconventional talents. The board would determine her immediate future, but Emma understood that her case represented larger questions about how military organizations identified and utilized exceptional capabilities that didn't fit standard categories. 6 people were alive because she'd refused to accept imposed limitations. Whatever consequences followed, that accomplishment would remain a testament to the value of preparation, determination, and the courage to act when conventional wisdom proved insufficient. Her fate now rested with an institution that had to decide whether exceptional results justified exceptional methods, or whether maintaining authority required punishing success that violated established protocols. The final decision came through channels that Emma hadn't expected, delivered not by Colonel Brennan or the disciplinary board, but by a delegation from NATO Special Operations Command that arrived at Camp Meridian on a gray morning 2 weeks. After her hearing, Emma was summoned to the conference room where she'd faced military justice, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. Instead of a disciplinary panel, she found herself facing Colonel James Mitchell, a soft-spoken officer whose reputation in special operations preceded him throughout the European theater. Specialist Kozlov, Mitchell began, your case has generated significant discussion at levels far above this installation. Emma remained at attention, uncertain whether this represented additional consequences or something else entirely. Your unauthorized operation saved 6 lives using capabilities that our standard assessment procedures failed to identify. Mitchell continued. That raises important questions about how we evaluate and utilize personnel with unconventional skill sets. Yes, sir, Emma replied carefully. It also demonstrates that exceptional circumstances sometimes require exceptional responses, even when those responses violate established protocols. Emma felt a flicker of hope, but maintained her neutral expression. Mitchell consulted papers. On the table before him, the disciplinary board recommended discharge for violation of military authority. However, their recommendation included notation that your demonstrated capabilities might warrant alternative consideration. Sir, Specialist, how would you feel about a transfer to NATO Special Operations Command, specifically to our advanced marksmanship program? Emma blinked, certain she'd misheard. Sir, I don't understand. You've demonstrated precision shooting capabilities that exceed most of our qualified specialists, Mitchell explained. Your unauthorized operation proved that unconventional approaches can achieve results that standard doctrine considers impossible. But I violated direct orders and conducted unauthorized operations, Emma said, still processing the unexpected. Direction of the conversation. You did, Mitchell agreed. And normally, that would result in discharge and possible criminal charges. However, your case has prompted discussions about whether our personnel management systems adequately identify exceptional capabilities. Mitchell stood and walked to the window overlooking the base. The military faces a fundamental challenge, maintaining discipline, while encouraging the kind of innovative thinking that wins wars. Your actions highlighted the tension between those requirements. Sir, what exactly are you offering? A chance to prove that your capabilities can be channeled through proper authority rather than independent action, Mitchell replied. The Advanced Marksmanship Program develops techniques for extreme-range precision shooting under unconventional conditions. Your mathematical background and demonstrated skills make you an ideal candidate. Emma felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Instead of punishment, she was being offered the opportunity she'd dreamed of for months. However, Mitchell continued, acceptance requires acknowledgement that your unauthorized actions were inappropriate, regardless of their effectiveness. Can you accept that distinction? Emma considered the question carefully. Sir, I can accept. That unauthorized action violated military discipline, even when it achieved important objectives. Good, because the program demands both exceptional skill and absolute adherence to operational authority. We can't have specialists who decide independently which missions to conduct. I understand, sir. Mitchell returned to his seat and smiled. For the first time since the meeting began. Specialist, your case has already changed how we think about capability assessment. Your transfer will be accompanied by new protocols for identifying unconventional talents that traditional evaluation might miss. Sir, what about the disciplinary charges? Resolved through your transfer and acceptance of program requirements, Mitchell replied. Your record will reflect successful completion of disciplinary action through specialized assignment. As Emma processed the magnitude of this unexpected outcome, Mitchell added, There's one more thing. Your environmental analysis during the previous crisis was noted by several operations commanders. The program includes advanced meteorological training that would expand your technical capabilities. Emma felt tears threatening but maintained her composure. Sir, I'm honored by this opportunity. Don't be honored yet, Mitchell said with a slight smile. The program has a 90% washout rate, and your unconventional background means you'll face additional scrutiny. You'll have to prove yourself every day. I've been doing that for months, sir. Yes, but now you'll be doing it with proper authorization and institutional support. 6 months later, Emma stood on the Advanced Marksmanship Program's mountain training facility. instructing a class of specialists in extreme range precision techniques. Her methods combined mathematical precision with unconventional positioning that maximized accuracy while minimizing exposure. Environmental factors at extreme range aren't just variables to account for, she told her students. They're tools that can be leveraged to achieve solutions that conventional approaches consider impossible. The students, all experienced marksmen, listened with respect earned through demonstrated capability rather than institutional assumption. Emma's techniques had been validated through operational success that transformed theoretical knowledge into proven doctrine. During breaks, she often reflected on the journey that had brought her from dismissed logistics specialist to recognized instructor in elite precision shooting. The path had required refusing to accept limitations that others imposed, developing capabilities that institutional thinking deemed impossible, and accepting consequences for actions that violated authority but saved lives. Her unauthorized operation had forced the military to confront questions about capability recognition and personnel utilization that extended far beyond her individual case. New assessment protocols now identified unconventional talents that traditional evaluation missed, creating opportunities for soldiers whose abilities didn't fit standard categories. But Emma's greatest satisfaction came from the simple knowledge that 6 people were alive because she'd prepared for a moment when preparation mattered more than permission. Her secret training had become the foundation for techniques that would save more lives in future operations. As she watched her students work through complex ballistic problems, Emma smiled at the irony. They'd told her she'd never handle the recoil of a precision rifle. Now she was teaching others how to master recoil through technique rather than strength, proving that the deadliest weapon wasn't always the biggest gun or the strongest shooter. Sometimes it was the person who refused to accept that impossible meant permanent. The sun set over the mountain training facility, casting long shadows across ranges where Emma continued developing techniques that pushed beyond conventional limitations. Her story had become proof that exceptional circumstances required exceptional people willing to exceed expectations when others deemed success impossible. They'd said she'd never handle the recoil. Instead, she'd become the soldier who taught others that recoil was just physics waiting to be understood and mastered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.